Hey everybody, welcome back to The Point. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. Been gone for a little bit, but I am back with lots to dive into. Apologize for being away for a couple days, but kind of the week got away from me. But back today with lots to chat about. Pair of conference finals, well, one's over. One is still ongoing after the heroics from little Joe Pavelski last night. The Denver Nuggets are in the NBA Finals after sweeping the Lakers. The Celtics, I think they're going to beat the Heat in the series and be the first team to come back from 3-0 down. But lots to dive into. Today, what I want to do is we're heading into a strange weekend because there's one NBA series left, there's one NHL series left before the Stanley Cup Final. There's no UFC this weekend, which sucks. No big boxing event. Of course, there's baseball, but there is some stuff happening. Memorial Cup starts tonight in Kamloops, which actually I think is going to be a really good Memorial Cup. There's some really good players in this event. There's a lot of interesting storylines. The Peterborough Petes came from nowhere to get here, so they're an interesting story in and of itself. So lots to chat about on that front, and we'll get into that today. And I've looked at every team that is a head coach or a GM vacancy. And I outlined the perfect location for each one. And it's also, I'm hedging who I think they're going to hire. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. Well, it does, but I'm hedging who I think they're going to hire, but also who I would want to. And I'll kind of detail why I think they'll do certain things. And in some cases, of course, they're going to be wrong. And I'll touch on maybe why I don't think it's such a good hire where it does make sense. And obviously this week, Craig Conroy was named the GM of the Calgary Flames. That is now filled. He was the assistant GM there for the last 9 years. Kyle Dubas is no longer the Toronto Maple Leaf GM. He's on the open market. So the Toronto Maple Leafs are looking for a general manager. I'll talk about them later. And I'll get into the Dubas drama and how Brendan Shanahan handled it a little bit later. But honestly, being off for the week and being a little busy wasn't a bad thing to not be able to talk about that because really, I don't care. Toronto Maple Leafs, I get it. They take up a lot of the headlines. They're like the Cowboys. They're like the Celtics or the Lakers. But Dubas leaving doesn't affect me whatsoever. Leaf fans, not the biggest loss in the world. No, I'll detail that later. But at the end of April, if somebody would have told me the Ice Cats, the Florida Panthers are headed to the Stanley Cup Final, I would have said you're crazy. The Ice Cats had just got into the playoffs on the second to last day because the Chicago Blackhawks defeated the Pittsburgh Penguins on the road coming off a back-to-back. The dreadful Chicago Blackhawks, who still got the first overall pick in the draft. Connor Bedard is going to be heading to Chicago. But that is what needed to happen for the Florida Panthers to make the playoffs, and Chicago did that for them. And now, almost 2 months later, the Florida Panthers are 4 wins away from winning their franchise's first Stanley Cup. And the Florida Panthers are heading to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time since 1996. The Panthers' first Stanley Cup Final in my lifetime. For reference, Doug MacLean was the GM of the Florida Panthers back in 1996. Guest on this fine program. John Van Riesbroek was between the pipes. They had a much different roster. But all those years later, they are back. And it's crazy because they beat the Bruins, number 1 seed in the NHL. They beat the Leafs, who had the 4th best record, and they beat the Carolina Hurricanes, who had more points than the Maple Leafs. They beat 3 behemoths, and every series has been easier. 7-5, 4 to get to a Stanley Cup Final. And in the first round, well, you get some bounces, you get luck, because people like to see the Bruins lose. Then you beat the Maple Leafs. Well, the goaltending was so good. They're not that good of a team. The Leafs should have won. Leaf fans, blah, wah, wah. But then you get to Carolina, and you play 4 games, all decided by 1 goal. And you could argue 3 of the games were overtime, because they were decided in the last minute. A quadruple overtime, another overtime game, and then a game finished in the final 4 seconds. The Florida Panthers are looking like a team of destiny, and yet they're playing like they've been there before. Barkov, Tkachuk touched the Prince of Wales trophy when they won on Wednesday night. They had no fear. They didn't care. They wanted to touch the trophy. They skated off with it. It was symbolism in some sense that they aren't afraid of curses, and they're going to take whatever challenge is head on. Florida made a change, a seismic one. The best player in franchise history, Jonathan Huberdeau, was shipped off to Calgary. Shipped to Calgary where Calgary's expectations were, we're going to win a Stanley Cup. They didn't make the playoffs. And the team that lost the trade was supposed to take a step back, was supposed to be worse than they were the year before. And during the regular season, they were. But they were built for the postseason. I thought this throughout the year. If they can only get in, they could be a threat. And you look around, Bobrovsky was there last year. Barkov was there. Duclair, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, Radko Gudas, Mark Stahl, Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad, all were there the year before. Think about that. The whole roster. This is like the Leafs dilemma, but Florida did something different. They traded for Matthew Tkachuk. Matthew Tkachuk, who was carried on a line by Johnny Gaudreau, it's what I've heard before, carried on a line by Lindholm, the third wheel, if you will. Well, that's since been put to bed. He's been nominated for the Hart Trophy, and he is, alongside Sergei Bobrovsky, the frontrunner to win the Conn Smythe Trophy. Matthew Tkachuk is the definition of a gamer. Matthew Tkachuk is a winner if there ever was one, and he is the power forward that any team would want, and multiple teams around the league should be shaking their head at. Well, Matthew Tkachuk isn't that good. He's not Austin Matthews. He's not Mitch Marner. He's not Elias Pettersson. He's not this, that, the other. No, he's better. Matthew Tkachuk, before the postseason, I was having this discussion. Who's the best American-born player in the world right now? The answer is Matthew Tkachuk. I thought it was Austin Matthews. That's over. It's over because, to me, the playoffs are weighed more heavily. They just are. It means more. You're playing for something great. Regular season, stuff the stat sheet. Do it up. But when you get to the biggest moments, how are you? Your ass cheeks clench. Can you make a shot? Can you do how about 3 game-winning goals in a 4-game span? Didn't score a goal against the Leafs. Okay, didn't have a great series, didn't score a goal. How about 3 and 4 games? How about 3 and 4 games and just putting that to bed? He affects the game in so many ways. He's physical, he gets the net, he wins puck battles around the ice, and he sets a culture, he sets a mentality on how the whole team is going to play. Because if you watch the Florida Panthers, they're not all that skilled base. Bennett, not a skilled player. Sam Reinhart, I don't think it's his key identity. Ekblad, no. Mark Stahl, God, no. You look around that team. It's a lot of work ethic. It's a lot of want to. That's how they win. It's not smoke and mirrors. It's not, how is this happening anymore? It's clear. You just got to look up and see it. This team believes, and quite frankly, they're winning because they work harder than their opponents. They worked harder than Carolina, which is a tough thing to say because Carolina works their ass off. They beat Toronto, and the thought is, well, and I'm thinking back to my own opinion. They got all these players. Toronto's got this, that, the other. Boston's got this, that, the other. Florida worked harder. It wasn't luck. It wasn't bounces. But guess what? Having a good goalie should not be put against you. That should not be a punishment. That should not be an X. It should not be the scarlet letter to say that you weren't successful. It is a requirement to win. How about other teams go get a good goalie? You can too. It's a free league. Trade for somebody. Go sign somebody. How about do that? Wham, wham, wham. We don't have this, that, the other. This team wins because they physically outwork their opponent. They don't let the other team beat them physically or along the boards. You want to go play that game, we'll play it with you, and we'll beat you. It's truly incredible what this team has done to pivot, to buy into that work ethic, and Sergei Bobrovsky has been phenomenal. But Freddie Anderson was pretty good too. So it's not just, well, okay, you got a hot goalie, that's what we lost. Wrong. It's because the other team outplayed you. It's because Florida, you look up and you go, wow, how did we lose this series? How did this happen? It's because Florida outworked you. Florida was willing to do things that you weren't. And that's pretty incredible. Because what the Ice Cats are doing, and we'll talk about Vegas in a little bit, but what the Ice Cats are doing requires a fundamental buy-in, and it requires just piss and vinegar and total effort. Because you can get by on skill. You can say we got more skill than our opponent, and that's why we're going to win. And that can work out for you for a little while. But to get to that next level, you need to be willing to put the work in. You need to be willing to put in that extra effort, to go the extra mile, and not everybody's willing to do it. The Florida Panthers do it in spades. Plus, they're just a mean group. They're a mean team. That they're just a bunch of assholes. The Florida Panthers. And if you hate physicality, if you don't like violence, if my grandmother was still around, God rest her soul, if she was still around, she would hate this Florida Panthers team because they're violent, they're mean, they do stuff that you don't like. I even hear this from my mother, who I also love dearly. But she said, oh, this player's dirty, I don't like this, that. That is why they're winning. They take you out and they do it with a smile on their face. The Florida Panthers are Logan Roy. If you're not familiar with that reference, watch Succession. They are Logan Roy because they will do whatever they have to do to win the deal. They will go behind you. They'll find an intermediary. They will find somebody. Somehow, some way, they are going to win that game by any means necessary. What does Logan Roy say? I don't lose. Yeah. In business, he's not going to lose. This Panthers team will win by, if they have to take your arm, take your leg, knock players out of the game, it doesn't matter to them as long as they win. Where these other teams, they're Ted Lasso. They're really nice people. They care about other people. They're pretty. They're proper. This, that, the other. It's really two very good shows, good messages, but it's two very different ways of going about it. And you look at what's transpiring. Sam Bennett knocks people out of series, or at least games, and It can be a hit that you might find questionable. It can be a cross check. But think about this. He knocked Trent Frederick out of round 1. Hurt him in game 3. Didn't play another game. Hurt Matthew Nyes in game 2 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then in game 4, on one of the first shifts in the game, in a hard yet clean hit, knocked my guy, Jacob Slavin, out of the game. Carolina's most important player, in my opinion. 3 players out of the respective series because of Sam Bennett. And that might say, okay, don't throw that hit. It's dirty. It's fair game. It's part of the process. It's doing business. His style of play is not going to be for everybody, but it's a winning fucking style of play. Radko Gudas. Is he going to take some penalties that maybe piss off Paul Maurice? Yes. But is he a buzzsaw that's going to do positive things that make you really excited? Yes. Radko Gudas is a butcher. Radko Gudas is a bull in a china shop. But he is playing awesome. If you just watch the game, maybe if you watch the games looking through metrics and thinking about this, that, the other, if you watch the game looking through plus minus, like, old people, then maybe Radko Gudas isn't the defenseman for you. He's played phenomenal. It's not just his hits. It's not just his cross check. He's a smart hockey player. 9 times out of 10, he makes good decisions with the puck. And again, he doesn't have to be told to play hard. Tkachuk doesn't have to be told to play hard. Barkov's the one that has to be told to play hard, and he's bigger than all of them. But when you have a bunch of people around that you don't need to tell it to, then it can kind of sink in. Montour, playing on this team, has grown to have more bite in his game. And he's as skilled as can be, but he also plays with a chip on his shoulder because he was told he was going to be great, then he wasn't great, had to bounce around the league, and now he's starting to find success. We go through every series. Why did Florida win round 1? You could look at Linus Ullmark was a fault, certainly. Bobrovsky started to play well. I would go round 1. The Ice Cats won that series because they were clutch in the big moments, and Boston wasn't. Won game 5 in overtime, won game 7 in overtime. Why did Florida win round 2? I would say Sergei Bobrovsky's top of that list. But also they measured the opposing team's great players, and you get credit for it's not just the goalie. Good defensive play. You limit their scoring opportunities. You deserve credit for that if you're an offensive or defensive player. So we'll chalk that up. And then in round 3, why did they win? Because they have Matthew fucking Tkachuk. Because they have a gamer of gamers, and he decided we're not going to lose this series. Every game he had either the goal or the assist on the game-winning goal. He's a superstar. He's a superstar, and he does it in an unconventional way, but that doesn't mean he's any less of a superstar. The Ice Cats are finals bound. Now they have to wait. And the Stanley Cup Finals are either going to start Wednesday or a week from tomorrow, which will be Saturday, June 3rd, I believe, depending on the results of tomorrow night's Game 5 between the Dallas Stars and the Vegas Golden Knights. Eight games in the conference final, 7 of them decided by 1 goal, and 5 of the 8 have gone to overtime, which is pretty incredible. And you could argue that Game 4 for that was basically an overtime. So I'll say 6 of the 8, split the difference. 6 out of the 8 are overtime games. 7 out of the 8 one-goal games. The one blowout, Game 3, Dallas and Vegas. Vegas leads 3-1 heading back to Sin City. First of all, last night's game was fantastic. If you didn't see it because you're checked out, because you don't care about the teams playing that remain, last night's game was phenomenal. Quick, fat. The game was over in 2 hours and 10 minutes, something like that, because they say the game started at 9 o'clock, but usually only starts about 9:18. The game was over at like 11:31. It was crazy. It was less than 2.5 hours. Fast game, no whistles. I loved every part of it. Ottinger was good. Nathan Hill was good. Great scoring opportunities. We'll get to Jason Robertson in a second, who's had a really good series, which I said he'd have to if they're going to win this series, yet they are down 3-1. But last night's game, just by itself, awesome game. Loved every part of it. I thought it was over last night. My mother texted me before the third, and I said it was over. I thought it might go to overtime because every game does, but I thought Vegas would find a way to win, but ultimately Braden McNabb takes a penalty in overtime, and that's where we get – I want to take a second to talk about this player. Little Joe Pavelski. Little Joe Pavelski had 8 goals in the second round. But it's not just about that. Joe Pavelski's 38. 38 years old. Same age as LeBron. He is still playing at a high level. And he's asked to do a hell of a lot on that Dallas Stars team. He plays on the top line with Rupe Hintz and Jason Robertson. He's asked to carry the load offensively. He's asked to be on the power play. He does a lot for that team. And the way this series is going, he's not going to win this series in all likelihood. So he might go down as a player that never wins a Stanley Cup. Like his buddy Joe Thornton, like another one of his buddies, Patrick Marleau, 2 all-time greats. I'll start off by saying that I think Joe Pavelski is a better hockey player than Patrick Marleau. Patrick Marleau, I think, is remembered more for the Iron Man streak, for being, the guy that was always there. I think Joe Pavelski is just a better player. More impactful in the game, better shot, better instincts, some of the best hand-eye coordination in league history. Give me Joe Pavelski before Patrick Marleau. But I think Pavelski's career, it's creeping into Joe Thornton territory where he's been that good. Was on San Jose forever, was a captain, was amazing. They couldn't come to terms. He goes to Dallas. He's been to 2 conference finals in his time in Dallas. He's always having success. They were an underdog team last year that made a Game 7 against the Flames in the first round. This team, wherever Joe Pavelski is, the team has success. And he's had good opportunities in Dallas to get over the hump and finally win his Stanley Cup. I don't think he ever will, because this year is his best chance. And who knows what happens with the team over the course of a summer heading into a new year. Fatigue makes cowards of us all as well. But his clutch ability, his just know-how to be in the right position, to score a goal, to find a way to keep games going. That series where San Jose played Vegas in that Game 7 when they came all the way, they were 4-1 down in the third, they came back. I just think of Joe Pavelski in those moments. I just have a ton of respect for his career. He's little Joe. You look at him, you don't think much, but he doesn't take shit from anybody. He's a clutch goal scorer, and he doesn't win championships, but he's a winner. And I know those two themes kind of butt heads, but he just finds a way to be successful, to be in the right position. I love Joe Pavelski. So great seeing him score that goal last night. Now, Game 5 is tomorrow, back in Sin City. If you think about the series, this series could go deep and Dallas could come back. Every game but one's been decided by 1 goal. Jake Ottinger on paper is a better goaltender than Aiden Hill. with little Joe Pavelski, Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, Sagan. Dallas has some pieces that you could argue are better than Vegas. What impresses me about Vegas and what their superpower is their team defense. Forwards, defense, they know how to play. Dallas scored 2 power play goals last night. That's how they stayed in this series, because 5-on-5, they don't get a whole lot, or the puck doesn't go in. And, those are basically the same thing. If you're not scoring goals 5-on-5, then what are you really accomplishing? I think that Dallas can make this more interesting. They can continue to push this series forward, but they need to break through 5-on-5. Because you can't expect the whistle every game. That can't be a bailout. That can't be something that you rely on. To get a power play early in overtime last night, it's a gift. It's a gift you're not always going to get. Because to me, the 5-on-5, Vegas is the better team. They dominated the third period last night. They got some good opportunities, and Ottinger was fantastic. He was what they expected throughout the series. They had to pull him in Game 3, and he was very good last night. But I look at Vegas. Stevenson's still playing really well. Mark Stone's been solid. William Karlsson's got 8 goals. Barbashev's been a perfect fit on that team. Pietrangelo is still a number 1 defenseman, even in his mid-30s. Game 5 is tomorrow. It's been a weird series. No Jamie Benn again after his stupid actions of Game 3. I wouldn't have suspended him, but again, they did, so you got to move on. Dallas is a quick team. They move in transition, and they do have high-end skill that can make it very difficult. I mean, you look at Heiskanen in that pass in overtime, just on a tee for Pavelski, it's in the back of the net. Jason Robertson, that's his second goal of the game. I mean, he must have been learning some hand-eye coordination from little Joe, because that was elite stuff. That was as good as it gets. And he's played a hell of a lot better in this conference final than he did in the first 2 rounds, in my opinion. He's more engaged. He's taking hits. He's willing to sacrifice. And it took him a little while. But I'm starting to see the guy that was there in the record. The guy's a stud. He just needed to buy in, and I didn't want his career to be a Jonathan Huberdeau where he's in the playoffs but not willing to put in the effort, so you never get over the hump. I don't see that with him. I see a guy that is starting to give a shit and notice what it takes to win. You see where he scored his 2 goals last night, dirty areas. He's getting there, he's putting himself in position to score some goals. So if Hintz is going, if little Joe can score a goal, Heiskanen in the back end, I mean, the one thing with him is how much does he have left? I thought he was hurt in the second round. He played 32 minutes in Game 7. Last night, it goes to overtime. The dude just seems to be out there at all times, every situation. He played 30 minutes last night. 30 minutes, and he's doing a hell of a lot. Suter, at his advanced age, he's 38. He played 24. That's a lot for him. Lindell played 20. Thomas Harley, Joel Hanley, Hockey Panya, these guys who you don't rely on all that much only played 20. So Heiskanen double, triple shifting. How long can he keep this up? The next pod won't be till Monday, so we'll see the results of this weekend. Obviously, we'll talk about it on Monday. But if I had to, again, 1-goal game, but I think Vegas 5-on-5 is just better. They limit opportunities. You might see a bunch of shots like last night, but how many great scoring opportunities did Dallas have? Not as many as Vegas, in my opinion. It's another close game because they've all been. These two teams are very even, very close. But I like Vegas to win on home ice. I like Vegas to win the series at home. They'll be motivated to, obviously, to finish the series. But also, you don't want to go back to Dallas. And like I said, if the series ends Saturday, the Stanley Cup Final will begin Wednesday night. Wednesday night. If Dallas wins Saturday night and the series is extended, the Stanley Cup Final will begin on Saturday. And whoever wins out of the Western Conference will have home ice advantage, because Florida is an 8 seed. So if Vegas wins on Saturday, they don't have to go anywhere. They can stay home and prepare for the Stanley Cup Final, which will begin on Wednesday night. I'm going to say Vegas wins tomorrow night. Dallas got to win. They don't get swept. They get that momentum. But no Jimmy Benn again. You miss that extra element on the ice. Their defense can only hold up for so long. I think they're missing another piece on that back end, like a whole lot of teams around the league are. Vegas is hoarding all of them. But I like Vegas finishing this up on Saturday night. I mentioned off the top, Craig Conroy got the general manager job in Calgary. He was there 9 years as AGM under Brad Treliving. I think it's a smart hire. I think he knows what he's doing. And I think it was a safe and a smart hire for Calgary. And I also think when you hire somebody that wasn't AGM, it doesn't mean they're going to do all the same things. Think of the Toronto Raptors. Nick Nurse under Dwayne Casey, he changed up a lot of coaching fundamentals. He did a lot of different things that ultimately led to a championship. So maybe Craig Conroy envisions this team differently than Brad Treliving did. And quite frankly, I think for Calgary, they need to look around and kind of figure out who they want to keep. Who are they willing to trade? Are they going to trade Tyler Toffoli? And it sounds crazy because he's coming off career year. He was their best player, but his value will never be higher. Do you want to give him a bunch of money, or do you want to trade him while the stock is high and get a bunch back? You're not going to trade Huberdeau because you think he's going to bounce back. Weegar, Kadri, are any of these contracts movable, and are you willing to explore trading him? You're going to trade Jacob Markstrom in net. So there's a lot of decisions to be made in Calgary, Alberta. The same can be said for Toronto. And this is where I want to get into my GM wheel and my perfect hires for all these teams. And we'll start with Toronto. Toronto it was a week ago now, Brendan Shanahan met the media and said, basically, he wanted to bring back Kyle, then saw his presser, which he talked about his family and emotions and this, that, the other, which some people thought was 100% genuine. There's others, such as myself, who didn't. That's neither here nor there. But that was happening. And he saw it, said, okay, I still want to bring him back. They're going to bring him back. 11th hour. Kyle wants more money. Brendan Shanahan says, okay, no thanks. We don't like you that much. So it was messy. It was clumsy. It looks amateur hour from the best organization in the NHL. So now the Toronto Maple Leafs are a month away from the NHL draft, a little over a month away from free agency, and they don't have a GM. So that means two things. It means you need to hire somebody quickly, and it also means you might not hire the best person. Because when you need to hire somebody, you got a timeline. You need somebody to come in. You need to learn where their office is. You need them to learn what you want to do, lay out a game plan, fundamentals, this, that, the other. And if the thought is, well, all our scouts have already picked our players for the draft, well, if you hire a general manager who was a GM of another team last year, and he was out on scouting meetings, he was at the World Juniors, he went and scouted other teams, which they do, because I see them at the rinks. And you hire somebody who was employed with another team, maybe he doesn't want to take the players that your scouts want. Or maybe one of your head scouts, assistant general manager, or the hell position Jason Spezza had, maybe he didn't bring his notes. Maybe he didn't leave his notes. Maybe he had all the names that you want to select. So now you're up. Who are you going to pick? It's not that easy. To think, well, these players won't play for a couple of years. I don't care. You're picking the future of your organization. Every year, the draft is important for every team, regardless of where you're picking, because you want to find good talent. Period. End of story. So, I don't care about the scouts in Toronto. They just fired the coaches with the Marlies. They're firing people left and right. They don't know what the hell they're doing right now. They need to figure this out. They need to get meetings. It's not just, oh, we like this player, let's take him. Stupidity. So, who is the hire that makes sense for Toronto? Well, there's one in the news right now, and that's Brad Treliving, former general manager of the Calgary Flames. I've said this many times on this fine program. He's not my favorite GM. I don't think he is all that bright. Sounds harsh, but again, it's me. I think he sticks to a core longer than he should. Stan did that in Calgary forever, and he stuck with a core that he only traded Tkachuk, the best part of it, when Tkachuk said, I'm no longer staying. So he reluctantly made a trade. But Brad Treliving was there for 9 years in Calgary. And for the most part, people think he was a really good GM. He made it to the second round, so he did about as good as Kyle Dubas. And actually, in that second round, he lost in 5 games. So just as good. They're about the same. They're about as average as it can be. So that fits right into the Toronto mold. But I think Toronto's going to hire Brad. 2 reasons that I've already laid out. They're on a rush timeline, and they need to hire somebody. And also, Brad was at the rinks looking at players, so he would know about the draft, and he knows what it's like to trade one of your core players. But also, Leaf fans, here's the thing. He knows what it's like to stick by a core and hope that it works. So maybe Brandon Shanahan, when he meets him, hey, Brad, how you doing? I'm pretty good, Brendan. Can I get you a water? Yeah, I'll have a water. Okay. So, Brad, I'm thinking, if I bring you on, I really like, John Tavares, really good guy. He's salt of the earth. He's got a couple kids. Oh, I love John. Okay, good. Willie, he's from Sweden, but he loves it here, and he's a good person. He kind of resembles one of my favorite podcast hosts. So we might want to keep him around too. You know what? Yeah, that makes sense. Scored 40 goals last year. Well, we'll find a way to re-sign him, even if we can't. We'll think about that next year. Yeah, exactly. So then there's Mitch. It makes a whole lot of sense to trade Mitch. He's got a no move starting in like a month. And I know I'm hiring you now, so I don't give you much time to think about this. But in about a month, he's got a new, But I like Mitch. I'm kind of scared of his dad, Paul. He's kind of got me by the balls every negotiation we do. He's never got 100 points, but he's a superstar. He wasn't that good in the playoffs this year or the year before or the year before that. But you know what? He can find it. He can find it. I trust the process. I believe he can find some success. So I kind of want to keep him. It's hard to find skilled players. Let's keep him. That makes sense. And then there's this guy, Austin Matthews. You gotta start negotiating with him July 1. Hope you know that. Yeah, okay. Well, Brendan, I didn't get to re-sign Tkachuk. Well, I know he'll stay. He'll stay, I promise you. We'll give him a bunch of money. We'll overpay. Well, not really overpay. We'll give him a bunch of money so that we can't sign other players, so we can't bring back Nylander, and not trading him then becomes pointless. And we got a bunch of these problems, but we'll re-sign him. We'll, salary cap's moving up and up. Gary tells us, so we'll be fine. Okay. Going through that exercise only to say, maybe Brad's a yes man. Maybe Brad just says, you know what, Kyle? You know what, Brennan? Yes. Pay me a good figure. Yes. And I'll do whatever you say, I promise. Because reports are saying Brandon Shanahan has told the core four, you're all coming back. Celebrate good times. Come on. They're all coming back. At last, they are back. The core four. For another year in the great city of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Can you believe it? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to yours truly, but it doesn't have to make a whole lot of sense to you, me, or Dupree. It can only make sense to Brandon Shanahan, the genius, the Frankenstein behind it all. But then there's the thought, well, Brad knows how to trade a superstar. And let's be fair to Brad. I still don't think he's a good GM. But to look what he got back from Matthew Tkachuk in a pinch, he did pretty well. Huberdeau, Uyghur, first-round pick. Pretty well. Did pretty well for himself. Did it work out? No. Now, could he calculate that John Huberdeau hates the weather? We grew up in Montreal, so maybe it's tough to blame him on that front. But again, we're splitting hairs. Can he find a trade for Mitch Marner in what's today? The 26th. He's got 30 days in June? He's got 35 days. And they haven't hired him yet. Chop, chop, Brendan. Does it make sense to break up the core four because they haven't won jack shit? Yep. Yes, it does. It does. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen, because sometimes you just do stuff that doesn't make sense. And sometimes you go back to the well and you do stuff. And oftentimes it's one shift. Tkachuk for Huberdeau. Superstar for superstar. But a superstar who plays a lot like the core four in Toronto, quite frankly. And then you got a superstar who was willing to give that extra effort to win, unlike the core four in Toronto. Is there a player out there that could make that move? I think there's a couple teams that would want the services of Mitch Marner. And before you go saying, well, Mitch Marner is a hell of a lot better than John Huberdeau. Huberdeau's been nominated for the Hart Trophy. Huberdeau's had over 100 points in a season. Mitch Marner's never done that. Newsflash. Really good player, but hasn't gotten to that level. And we're only talking about regular season, because these two guys will never talk about their playoff performances because they both stink. So you can compare the two. They're not all that different. Thing one, thing two, cat in a hat. What's the difference here? Not all that much. Except maybe the thing in the Maple Leafs jersey wasn't as good as the one that was in the Ice Cat jersey. I still think there's moves to make with teams like New York, with teams like Los Angeles. Get creative, look around the league. Can you find something that you like? This summer, these are, to me, the biggest names that could be on the trade list. Mitch Marner, Erik Karlsson in San Jose. I'm not looking at these to Toronto. These are just trade list period that I see guys could be moved. Brock Besser, Pierre-Luc Dubois, John Gibson, Tyler Toffoli, JT Miller, Colton Parayko. Just some of the names that could result in big trades. You look at the free agent class, it's not all that good. But what you got now isn't winning. The Leafs will hire a GM. Now, they do like to make news on Friday. But I don't think they'll release anything today because they'll think it's way, way too soon. Way too soon. And Frank Saravelli just reported this. As the process to find next lease forever GM gets moving, I'd expect Toronto to interview at a minimum Jason Botterill, Marc Bergevin, Brad Treliving, and Peter Chiarelli if they haven't already. Few names to chew on. Interesting. Interesting for sure. All guys who've been at the position before, all veterans, all guys who've had some success and then some really bad failures, which is the job. I think it's going to be Brad Treliving. I could be wrong, but that's where I see the Leafs going. Pittsburgh is the other team in the NHL that has a GM opening. They're going to talk to Kyle Dubas. They requested permission. They've gotten permission from the Toronto Maple Leafs. After Kyle said he wouldn't be showing up elsewhere, but only be going to Toronto, which, as I said last week before I took my hiatus, was a lie because every general manager, this is what a GM is. A GM, president, in some cases, coaches. This is who they are. And we got to remember this, guys. They're politicians. And you know what politicians do? They lie. They tell you something and then do the complete opposite. When I get into office, I'm going to make this change and this change and this change. I really care about carbon tax. And I think I want to get green vehicles going in. I want to plant 1,000 trees. You don't do any of it. Because once you're in, you're in. And you don't really care that much for the first couple of years. You start to care after when you need more votes. Brendan Shanahan's got 3 years left on this contract, and he just fired a GM. Kyle Dubas was playing a leverage game that he lost. He was trying to play it with Toronto. When you're in that position, you'll say whatever you want because he wants more money. Well, now he's got to suck up to somebody else. But he was lying. He's 37 years old. He's not going to work again. Going to go get a job at the local Kmart and bag groceries. I think he'll be working in hockey again. I think he'll be a GM of a NHL franchise, but that's just me. That's just me. So all these general managers, these presidents, they're liars. They're frauds. And it sounds harsh. We like to. Brendan Shanahan was such a good player, and we love him in Detroit. We love the way he played. Yes, it doesn't change the fact that you're a fucking liar. You had to morph into this other person. I hate lying. I'm as honest as they come. But if I got a GM job, I would have to lie some. Because it's just par for the course. It's part of the job. Kyle Dubas, I'll only come back to Toronto, I promise. Okay. You didn't get the job, bruh. What are you going to do now? Go down to Steel City? Work for the Pens, maybe? I don't think they're going to hire Kyle Dubas, and I don't think Kyle Dubas wants that job. I'll get to that in a minute. Pittsburgh Penguins. A job that I don't think many people want. Because let's be honest. The one move in Pittsburgh that makes sense, that no GM would even want to broach because it would scare the hell out of you. The one move in Pittsburgh that totally makes sense is trading Sidney Crosby. They're not going to do it, but it's the one move that makes sense. Your team is strapped. You got bad contracts. You're going nowhere. It makes sense to trade Sid for the team and for Sid. Again, legacy contracts that they did last summer. Fail. Malkin, Letang. Now you're stuck with them. Sidney Crosby wants to rot because we want to show low. We're going to do this tribalism again. We're going to do this tribalism thing where you can only stay with one person. You can only play for one team. I want to retire with the Penguins jersey. Okay. LeBron James, who some argue is the greatest basketball player ever, has played for the Lakers, has played for the Cavs, played for the Heat. Played everywhere. All these different teams, he's looked at as the best player ever. Charles Barkley, Suns, Sixers, Rockets. You bounce around. Things change. This tribalism where I can only play for one, it's so boring. And again, why you want to do it. And if you're a GM in Pittsburgh, I'd say if I was interviewing for the job, I would go in saying, I want to trade Sid. Can I? You're going to get a no, and I'll probably be ushered out of the room. But if you're an ownership group there, it's the smartest move you could make because you're not winning with Sidney Crosby the rest of his career or with Malkin's end of his career or Letang. Book it. If I'm wrong, I'll come back. I'm not going to be wrong. But Kyle Granlund's stuck in Pittsburgh. Tristan Jar's UFA could make a save anyway. But you look, the rest of your roster, you got problems after problem after problem. There's not a whole lot of solutions coming in Pittsburgh. Brian Burke and Ron Hextall made it worse, not better. So that's why I think Pittsburgh is going to give the job to Jason Botterill. Botterill is the former GM of the Buffalo Sabres, the current assistant GM of the Seattle Kraken. You look at him and say, hey, your first stint wasn't all that successful. But you've worked under Ron Francis in Seattle, one of the best GMs in the NHL. Maybe you picked up a thing or two. You'll be better at your second stint than your first stint. Let's see what you can do here. And maybe Botterill might have to look at trading. They won't trade Crosby. Because teams invest in this tribalism thing as well, and so boring. So boring, and it's so wrong. Because what I want to do in life, what I want to do in sports, what do you want to do in anything you do? You want to win. And however you value winning, I'll tell you what, winning is not keeping a player on your roster to keep who happy? Little Timmy? Is little Timmy going to be happy when he watches Sidney Crosby at age 36 when the team isn't making the playoffs again? Is that funny for Timmy? He's going to keep going to the games? Trade Crosby to Montreal and get a shitload back. Trade Crosby to Montreal and get Nick Suzuki to come back to Pittsburgh. You think would Montreal do that? Yeah, they would. You get a package and Nick Suzuki would come back. Even at Crosby's age, it would happen. They'd say right now, no way we'll do that. Okay, sure. Sid's wanted to play in Montreal forever. He grew up a Canadien fan. Do it. They won't. You need a youth movement in Pittsburgh. You need to make changes, but you stick the same. Botterill will get a second chance at being a general manager in a shitty situation with very little flexibility. Fun job, but I think it'll pay well because they know going in, this is a shit job. Congrats, Jason. Kyle Dubas. Where is Kyle Dubas going to end up? Maybe nowhere this year, but also maybe somewhere this year. And here's my thought here. The Ottawa Senators still haven't picked an owner. That shit takes forever. It's like going to court in this country. You're arraigned one day, it takes 2 years before you get to court. The Olin trial took like fucking 10 years. But nevertheless, that's another rant for another day. They need to pick a new owner. Apparently, they're down to 3. Ryan Reynolds is out. A couple rich guys. Co-owner of the Montreal Canadiens or something like that. Another rich Greek guy. Bunch of rich people bidding on the Senators. Well, whenever they're hired, hopefully before the draft, I think it will be before the draft because they'll want to introduce them at the draft in Nashville in about a month. So get it together. But I think by the draft, the owners will be there. They'll make their first selection as a team, and they will be on the stage with Gary Bettman. It'll be a perfect, nice moment. That's how they do these things. PR. Let's say that owner gets hired or buys the team Monday morning, just for instance. Well, I believe that Pierre Dorion, I'm thinking Mark Bergevin. Pierre Dorian's either got 1 year left, or he might not even have a year left. They might can him. What if they fire Pierre Dorion and they hire Kyle Dubas? I think Ottawa likes Kyle Dubas. I think Kyle Dubas wants to remain in Ontario, and I think it's a fit. Kyle Dubas did them a solid. He took on Matt Murray, helped their team this year. He would be jumping onto a team that has a whole lot of young talent that have pretty good contracts, all in all. Tim Stützle, who's a blossoming superstar, and what he would have to do is find a goaltender of the future to see if he can get this team to the postseason. Chychrun is there. A nice defenseman add. Chabot is still there. You might need some more depth forwards and a couple depth defensemen that can play significant minutes. But you got yourself a team. It's a better situation than Pittsburgh. And again, this is all, there's no reporting on this. There's nothing. You need to buy a team and have the owner like Kyle. But I think they might. And Pierre Dorian's been there a long time, and he hasn't made the playoffs in 5 years. It's a long time for a GM to remain employed. I think Kyle Dubas is going to pass on the Pittsburgh job. He might be offered it. I think he might pass and wait for the Ottawa position to open up either this summer or next summer. And he'll make a decision. When that becomes available, he will interview for the job and he will take it. And here's the kicker. You're telling me the Ottawa Senators don't want to rehire Jason Spezza? They do. That new ownership group will want to look. We're bringing back our old players. They're in the fold. We got a great alumni association here in Ottawa. It's going to happen. I will say this though. I think Jason Spezza resigning from the Maple Leafs was a bad decision. Here's why. If he remains on with the Leafs, he gets to pave his own path. He gets to, he gets to make his own moves and make it look like he's progressing. He's directing his career. Better way to put it. Now he looks like a Kyle Dubas follower. For better or for worse, that is the interpretation. That is the look. He is Kyle's guy. So if Kyle goes to Ottawa, like I'm pontificating about, then gets fired and he goes and gets another GM job, does Jason follow him? Then does Jason just become the guy? You're my AGM. It's like Steve Spott with Peter DeBoer or Mike Kitchen with Gerard Gallant. You always get to bring an assistant with you. Is Spezza just a permanent assistant? Go do whatever Kyle says. I think that's not the career you want unless you're just hanging on, making less money than the GM. I don't know. I would have stayed on in Toronto. I get the loyalty. I get the loyalty thing. There's no loyalty in sports, Jason. You know that. Kyle Dubas was not going to offer you a contract for the next year. He gave you a job. I get it, okay? You probably wanted to still play hockey. He wouldn't let you. How loyal was he really? This might sound harsh, people. This is just how I see it and how I look at things. This is pro sports. It's a business. It's not everybody's feelings gets catered to. This isn't a fucking therapy session. Let's pivot to head coaches. We got, as of right now, Columbus, Calgary, Anaheim, the New York Rangers, and the Washington Capitals. Start with Columbus. Columbus is an interesting position. They signed they have Line A signed, they got Johnny Gaudreau. They're going to have another high draft pick. And they do have some good young talent in Columbus. Need to look at goaltending options and hope for health. But their team isn't terrible, but it also isn't great. They had assistant coach be brought on last time, Brad Larson. He didn't work out. To me, Columbus is an organization that does not spend big money on general manager or on coaches. They will spend to the salary cap if they have to, but that's not their prerogative. I think Columbus is going to hire a guy that's been a head coach before, because they just had somebody who wasn't. But they're going to bring somebody on that is less, well-known than some of the big names out there. I think Columbus is going to hire David Quinn. David Quinn, the former head coach of the New York Rangers. Here's another little connection. John Davidson was in New York when David Quinn was hired. So they're familiar with one another. David Quinn came from NCAA, so there's a connection. He's coaching currently at the World Hockey Championships. The U.S. will be in the semifinals tomorrow, so he's having a good showing over there with a really young team. And Columbus is a youngish team. They got some young talent coming in, so I think that'll be a good fit for him. Kent Johnson going into his second year. So you got some young talent in Columbus. I think David Quinn will be a good fit. I see Columbus hiring David Quinn as their next head coach. So that's the fit for me. Calgary. Calgary's interesting. Craig Conroy, just named GM, so he'll be hiring his first head coach. They just had Daryl Sutter, who was authoritarian to the max. And every player on that team hated it. So these teams aren't that inventive. They go the opposite approach, and they'll say, let's get somebody who's loosey-goosey, who doesn't have a whole lot of structure, but yet has experience. That screams to me Gerard Gallant. I don't think Gerard Gallant, I think he's an okay coach. I don't think he's a great one. He's had success in the league, I get it. But I think he's also been a part of some really good teams. You watch his teams in Vegas, if you watch his teams in New York, Florida, etc., the teams play up and down, they play loosey. There's not a whole lot of systems. There isn't a whole lot of planning. This is how we break out of the zone. This is our defensive mentality. It's just a whole lot of, okay, let's piece it together. And I don't like that in a coach. I like somebody that you're playing a set structure. It doesn't have to be so set that you can't break off from it. But, he can go in. He's coached Huberdeau before. So he's had him there. That could be something that makes your superstar happier. He is very popular around the league because I think he doesn't do a whole lot of structure. He doesn't do a whole lot of structure, so he can be very popular when he's there's no systems and you're playing that loosey-goosey style. Calgary played a certain way. Under Daryl Sutter, you're playing a certain way. If you're not playing that way, you'll be out of the lineup. And it works for guys like Tyler Toffoli, for Jeff Carter, for these guys that played for Daryl and had success. For Huberdeau, for Kadri, it didn't. It didn't pan out, and it turned into a nightmare. He's coached so many places, but you look, Peter DeBoer got another job. You looked at Jim Montgomery got another opportunity. Guys in their third or fourth stint, Paul Maurice in Florida, there's a whole lot of retreads, and eventually you can find success doing it. And if you see guys like DeBoer, who's in a conference final again, like Paul Maurice, who's already gone, who's already in a Stanley Cup final. It can make you say, well, hey, this coach has given this team's the perfect fit for him. He can get us over the top. I don't like dictating to players, and I think this coaching hire would do that. But I have a feeling Craig Conroy is going to like Gerard Gallant. He's going to be the next coach of the Calgary Flames. Anaheim. The Anaheim Ducks. This team is not close to being competitive. This team is not close to winning a championship. But they do have a whole lot of young talent that have played really meaningless hockey for a number of years. Trevor Zegras, Mason McTavish, Jamie Drysdale, Troy Terry. They have players who can put the puck in the back of the net that can put on a show. But how can you bring it all together? And how can you at least make this team competitive and look like a respectable team? That's what this team's trying to do. Because under Dallas Eakins, they were not. They became a joke last year. They really were hard to watch. And if Chicago was not so terrible, Anaheim would be regarded even more pathetic. So you need somebody to set a culture, to set a standard, and maybe be a coach who isn't going to be there when you're great, but can build you up to get to that place. Who could that be? Who's a guy that's a pain in the ass, that's going to get you to play hard, that's going to get you to play a certain way, and get you to a point, and then the GM will fire that guy because they're sick of them and the team needs a new coach? The Anaheim Ducks, I think, are going to hire Mike Babcock. Mike Babcock will be back he's interviewed for this job. He's also interviewed in Columbus. He said he doesn't want to coach a big market team again. Anaheim's not a big market team. Anaheim would be another team that would be a rebuild, but you have a whole lot of young talent. Adam Fantilli will be the second pick in the draft. He's going to Anaheim. McTavish was the third pick in the draft. You go through it, you got high-end skill on this team, and I think a lot of these guys are different than what he had in Toronto. You do have a decent goalie in John Gibson, unless you decide to trade him this summer like they pontificated about for the last seemingly 4 to 5 years. Mike Babcock's also been an assistant coach in Anaheim early in his career. So he has familiarity with the organization, different owners at the time, but he's been in Anaheim before. I just think it makes sense for this team. He might not want to go back because he looks at it and says this is the same model as Toronto, except they're not as close to winning, which they aren't, to be fair. Because Toronto had really high-end talent, and Anaheim's still waiting for some of these guys to blossom or show that they can be. They haven't shown that they're elite yet. So, but if I'm Anaheim, I'm seriously considering this hire. I would want to hire him. So, it's an interesting proposition. I think it's scary for a number of teams because they look at it and go, Mike Babcock, he's got a history. But I would look at doing it. I would look at doing it because I think he at least comes in and he changes. This team's kind of been running. Inmates have been running the asylum. The young players are dictating the way the team is playing, and I don't think you can have it anymore. Mike Babcock back in the NHL. Who wouldn't love to see that? New York Rangers. This was the hardest one to pick for me. The Rangers had David Quinn. They fired him. Then they had Gerard Gallant. They fire him, and now they're in a position where they still want to compete for a championship. They still have Mika Zibanejad. They have Adam Fox. They have number 10, Mr. Will never win fucking anything, Artemi Panarin. They still got Keandre Miller, who's a restricted free agent, who's a stud. Chris Kreider. This team is going to change this offseason, but still be competitive. That's how I view this offseason for Chris Drury and this management core. So who do you bring in as head coach? I don't believe they want to bring in a guy that doesn't have experience. I think the Rangers, that's just their brand. We want somebody with experience. We want somebody that's done this before. It's kind of a splash hire. At least you can say to somebody, this coach has won this, that, the other. And my thought was, okay, Peter Laviolette. Peter Laviolette has gotten the Philadelphia Flyers and the Carolina Hurricanes to a Stanley Cup Final. He's had success in his career getting teams. He won a cup in 2006. He hasn't won one since, but he's at least gotten them there. And I think he is a good coach, Peter Laviolette. And we also got the Nashville Predators to the Stanley Cup Final as well. So 3 different organizations he's gotten to a Stanley Cup Final. It failed in Washington, but again, they were on the back end, and that was a tough job, in my opinion. He goes into New York. He'd have a better opportunity to have success. In his first year, he seems to have he has a ton of success with the new team, as new hires do. And he would be going in, I think it'd be a short-term contract, and they tell him 2 to 3 years, and we want you to win right away. We expect you to be in contention for the Stanley Cup. That's our only goal. After losing to New Jersey, they will be motivated, and I think Chris Drury, who fired David Quinn to bring in Gerard Gallant, has now fired. He's not firing another GM. Chris Drury, another head coach, pardon me. Chris Drury is next. His ass, he knows that this hire is really important. And Gerard Gallant complained about this team being soft, complained about this team being small. And I think Chris Drury's got a little bit of the Kyle Dubas going on right now, where he needs to change the look of his team. He needs to bring in a tough, physical group. And that's, you look at the Flyers. Why did they get there? Because they were a tough bunch. They had Chris Pronger on that team. They had a bunch of guys, Mike Richards, Jeff Carter. They didn't take that crap. They battled hard. In Nashville, that team wasn't the most talented, but you had a bunch of players with Johansson, who at the time was playing really good hockey, and you had Roman Josi. They battled their way to the Stanley Cup Final. That's how I view Laviolette as a coach. Does he deserve another coaching opportunity? You could argue no, because he's gotten a ton. And you should say, stop hiring retreads, give somebody else an opportunity. Well, maybe they will. And maybe some of these teams will, but I don't see it, because Bruce Cassidy, coached in Washington, coached in Boston, now he's coaching in Vegas. Maurice, Toronto, Carolina, Winnipeg, now in Florida. Gerard Gallant, again, this happens over and over again. Peter DeBoer. When they see a coach that has success, you hire him. And I'd put New York, I'd put Alain Vigneault, but they've already had Alain Vigneault, so I'm not going to rehire him. He might be done. I think he's a better coach than Gerard. If I was Calgary, I'd hire Alain Vigneault over Gerard Gallant, but we'll see if they do that or not. But retreads always seem to come back in. Always seem to find their way back into the scheme of things. So I got Peter Laviolette going to the Rangers. Washington Capitals. Washington's in a weird spot. Ted Leonsis, the owner, always wants this team to be competitive. Always wants this team to be in the playoffs, which they have been for many years, until this past year. Tom Wilson is aging. His body's breaking down. He's not what he used to be. Nick Backstrom should retire. We'll see if he does. John Carlson missed half the year because he took a puck to the face. And Alex Ovechkin is still a stud, but again, he can't do it all by himself. Kuznetsov, under contract, underperforming. This team has contract problems. They have an age issue, and it's going to be tough to resolve it. Washington and Pittsburgh. have been linked forever, and they are linked now because both teams are in tough positions to be competitive. And both ownership groups want their respective teams to be competitive, but they're not going to be with the rest of the league because of their age, cap structure, this, that, the other. So, who does Washington hire? They just had Peter Laviolette, Todd Reardon, Barry Trotz. They've had a number of head coaches. To me, Lindy Ruff is returning as the head coach of the New Jersey Devils. Tom Fitzgerald announced that last week. He said, we like Lindy Ruff. He had a hell of a season. We're bringing him back. Makes sense. Second round for the first time since 2012. For Washington, maybe bringing in a coach that's a very limited head coaching opportunity. But he's done a little bit, and he's on that staff, and he's a guy that's really well liked around the league. Was really well liked by his players in Florida. I think a good hire for Washington is Andrew Brunette. Because I think he'll push his team to be competitive, which is what the organization wants. But ultimately, you're not going to win. Could Washington work hard enough to be a playoff team next year? Maybe, but I look around and I see the Buffalo Sabres and I see the Ottawa Senators, and you still see Toronto's going to be a good team, and you see the Rangers, and it's hard to see it. I think Pittsburgh has a better chance, and I don't think they're any good either. So it's a difficult proposition, and I don't think it's an easy job for whoever coach that comes in. But Brunette's only been a head coach for half a year. Joel Quenneville got fired because of the Kyle Beach scandal. He took over the bench, got to the second round, got swept. They moved on. He joined Lindy Ruff, and now he can stay and become the assistant again in New Jersey, or potentially get a head coaching opportunity during this window. I would take the Washington job. At least make a good impression, continue to build your resume around the league, and you look at it, your first head coaching opportunity always isn't the best one. Bruce Cassidy was a head coach in Washington. He had to be an assistant for a while, and then found a job in Boston, had a lot of success, won Coach of the Year, got to the Stanley Cup Final in 2019, and ultimately they let him go. But then he has high praise. They like him so much. He is now behind the bench in Vegas, and he's a win away from going to another Stanley Cup Final. Sometimes it takes a couple of opportunities. Sometimes it takes a couple of looks. I think for a guy like Brunette, he is going to get a job during this cycle if he wants one. I think it's just up to him whether he wants to take one of these jobs. He can look at it and say, maybe the next hiring cycle will be better. If he looks and says, I'll take the Rangers job, but if that's not available, I'm not going there. He might say, next year, I could be the Ottawa Senators head coach. That might be a really good gig. I would love to have that opportunity. Maybe something opens up in Buffalo. I would love to jump on that. Minnesota. Maybe Minnesota's available. I used to play there. I'm well liked. So there's always different opportunities. Things open up when you least expect it. Maybe Edmonton does something with they got a new GM. Maybe they'll want a new head coach. So I think Brunette to Washington makes sense. I think this is more up to him deciding what he wants to do with his career, and less about during this hiring cycle what the teams want to do with him. Now, I mentioned the Rangers job was a tough one to figure out for a head coach. And I think there's a wild card head coaching candidate here. And I tie in the Rangers and the Maple Leafs. Currently, Kyle Dubas is the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. That does not mean he'll be the head coach come Game 1 of next season. Sorry, Sheldon Keefe. We talk about those two guys so much. I get them intertwined. That does not mean he'll be the head coach come the first game next year. The wild card name for me is Joel Quenneville. Joel Quenneville has repented. He's admitted guilt. He's been out of the game for almost 2 years now. He deserves another opportunity to coach, in my opinion. Was he wrong for what he did in Chicago? Yes. And should he have been fired? Not by Florida, but at the time in Chicago, yes. But apparently he's done the therapy stuff. He's gave back whatever he's had to do, he's done. All I know about Joel Quenneville is he's a really good coach. And his teams win. And I think that would be really attractive to teams with brand names like the Maple Leafs, like the Rangers. Sheldon Keefe's a good coach. I'm not saying he isn't. But is he Joel Quenneville? No. Joel Quenneville's got 3 Stanley Cups. And he's been to 4. Sheldon Keefe's won 1 round. I think the Rangers would want Joel Quenneville. I think the Leafs would want to at least talk to him. I think he wants to go to Original 6 team. Gary Bettman said he would talk to Joel Quenneville after the season, meaning when the Stanley Cup Final is over. I don't know why it has to wait till then. I don't know what he's doing. If I was a team, I'd want to know if I can hire this guy. If there's something that can be done before you hire a head coach, I think the Rangers or the Leafs would love to hire him. Would love to at least interview him. I don't know, but if it becomes available that he's available to be taken off the, to be looked at, I don't know. Who knows? Oh, there's a lot to dive into. So, head into the weekend. Game 5 tomorrow between Dallas and Vegas. We got Game 6, Celtics Heat tomorrow evening. And I think the Celtics are pushing it to 7. I think the Celtics will be the first team in NBA history to come back from 0-3 down. History of the league, 0-150. These type series, none of them have ever. I think the Celtics can be the first one to do it. We also got the Memorial Cup this weekend. Memorial Cup. Kamloops, Seattle, Quebec, and Peterborough. Seattle, to me, should be the front runner. They should be the favorite to win it. You look at their team: Dylan Guenther, Arizona first round pick, Brad Lambert, Carson Lambos, Travis Milich. They're a loaded team. And that gets started. The first game is Kamloops, the host, playing Quebec. Kamloops been off for a couple weeks, but they did make the conference final. Kamloops has Logan Stankoven, who's been there for a long time. They also traded for Owen Zellweger at the trade deadline. If you remember, they gave up 6 draft, a huge piece for him. So Kamloops will be looking to be a host team to win like St. John was last year. Quebec, Zachary Bolduc, Nathan Gauthier, who's a first-round pick of the New York Rangers. So I'm sure they'll be watching him in New York. You got Peterborough, Brennan Othman, Avery Hayes, who's an overager who played in the tournament last year for Hamilton. He's been very, very good for this team. Tucker Robertson. Peterborough is the most surprising team to me making it this far, but they battled and they found a way to do it. Memorial Cup's always fun. You get to watch some really high-level skilled players battle all year to get this opportunity, play on the big stage. And out in Kamloops, this should be a fun tournament. I got Seattle ultimately winning it and getting a championship back to the Western, because it's been a while since the WHL has won Memorial Cup, and they got a 50% chance of doing it this year. Monday, we'll start to get back into some baseball stuff. For right now, I can tell you the Jays stink. Players only meeting. not going well down there in Toronto. We might have some resolution on GMs, head coaches next week. Currently, we got the Charles Schwab going on in the PGA Tour. Harris English, 4 under today. He is 9 under, leading the tournament. Harry Hall, who shot 8 under yesterday, has not teed off yet, so he's got a lot of leeway there. But should be a fun weekend. Hope you guys all enjoy. Looks like beautiful weather on the horizon. So we'll talk to you all on Monday. Sorry for the time off, but I am back, locked and loaded now. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. Enjoy the weekend. Talk soon. This is To The Point.